today I want to take a look at our mindset, which is probably fairly obvious, and I'm especially wanting to address what Carol Dweck would have called in her book, Mindset. She would have called it a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. Or perhaps in our context, we would call it a victim mentality versus a biblical mentality. The idea of a fixed mindset is that how I am and who I am is all that there is. There's nothing that I can do to change. Effectively, there's very little agency. Whereas a growth mindset, if you get something wrong, addresses failure with the attitude of, I haven't got this right yet. I haven't learned this yet. And I love how she applies it to different contexts. One, for example, is with parents of children at school where they are cautious not to only praise the outcome, but to actually celebrate and affirm the effort. Because the effort is what actually forms character. The effort is where we are developing the tenacity, the perseverance to do what we can, to handle that which is within our control. Now, the idea of being a wounded healer, the idea of being a follower of Jesus that lives for more than just ourselves, that lives beyond ourselves, that lives for the sake of others, as we spoke about last week. Probably the single greatest antidote or obstacle or enemy of living like that is living with a victim mentality. Where I allow circumstances, challenges, things that are taking place to actually hold me back from seeing where I can still participate and serve and help and love and share from the journey that I've been on. I want to take a look at a couple of common traits of a victim mentality before we get into what it means to actually have a biblical or growth mentality. And I want to just encourage you or remind you that on the Bible app, the YouVersion Bible app, all of the notes that you're going to see on the screen are available on there if you make sure you save them today. So don't panic about trying to note everything down. As you might have picked up already, I'm going to try and race through some of these, and then I'll slow down with others. And let me just say, please, there is no intention to shame anyone, to add further discouragement to anyone. This is not to make pain worse. Please, if that's your perception, please know that you're misunderstanding my heart and you're misunderstanding the heart of God. This is more to be aware. This is more for me to pay attention and to see, God, is this something that you are bringing to my attention for the sake of adjusting, not for the sake of condemnation? Okay, you ready? A couple of common traits. Number one, blaming others or circumstances for one situation rather than examining one's own role. That's not to say that there isn't some responsibility on others, but if I reject all responsibility and blame others or circumstances, chances are I could be struggling with the victim mentality. The second is very similar, refusing responsibility or accountability and becoming defensive when challenged. Now, I wish that defensiveness just disappeared as we grow up or as we get a little bit older. It doesn't. It's something that we have to work on. If that's a challenge, chances are that's connected to insecurity. We have to be conscious. Another trait would be chronic complaining instead of problem solving. There's appropriate lamenting and sharing, but if it's only chronic complaining and there's no desire to recognize what I can do to help solve, I could be in trouble. A persistent sense of passivity. In other words, I have no control. There's this level of pessimism or guilt. You're kind of paralyzed by, well, it just is what it is. And there's a sense of futility. Another trait would be believing everyone else's life is easier or better. I'm not going to get you to put your hand up, but chances are you have had moments, because you're a human being, where you've been like, yes, it must be nice. And very rarely do we know somebody else's story. Very rarely do we know somebody else's story. Rehearsing old hurts and using them as excuses for present behavior. So it's not a case, it's not that you can't acknowledge stuff that's happened, but if I'm still sharing the same story that I shared 20 years ago with the same level of pain, hurt, trauma, chances are, I think that's what psychologists would call PTSD. I'm not remembering it, I'm reliving it still. And that's often coupled with unforgiveness. Anyway. Okay, focus, Jason, focus. Rejecting constructive criticism and resisting advice. It's another trait of a potential victim mentality. And again, maybe in your mind, well, they don't understand. They don't know what I'm going through. Another trait would be making others responsible for your happiness. I'll never forget, and I'm very grateful that I heard this before I got married, which is nearly 27 years, by the way, that I think it was John Maxwell and his wife, I think it could have been that, where I think she was sharing how she had to realize somewhere in the early years of their marriage that is never going to make her happy. No one should ever be getting married expecting someone else to make you happy. If you're having children so that they'll make you happy, that is putting a pressure that is not meant for your children or your spouse for that matter. If you're developing a friendship so that they'll make you, guys, we cannot make somebody else responsible for our happiness. Another trait would be constantly seeking recognition for one's suffering. And lastly, moral elitism, which might surprise you, or a martyr complex, which is kind of believing that I'm more righteous because I have suffered. It's weird, right? Person feels like a victim, but I'm a pretty righteous victim because I've suffered more than you. It's so hard, guys, it's so hard. So we need to be careful. And again, please, in some of these cases, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit and being mildly facetious at the end there, but I want us to be careful. Because if we feel helpless, we'll feel hopeless. And if we are helpless and hopeless and we don't recognize that we have any agency is another word for I have some influence, I have some way, something that I can do. I can land up staying paralyzed in what is a legitimate pain, suffering, injustice. This is not to diminish or invalidate any suffering that you've gone through. I'm just saying that if we allow that to limit us for the rest of our lives, we stop living long before we die. And we stop God from being able to do a work in us and a work through us. There are quite a few passages of Scripture that reframe suffering and reframe the things that have happened to us. Perhaps the most famous would be Romans 8, verse 28. And this is being written by someone who experienced extraordinary opposition. He didn't have a victim mentality. He was beaten. People did try and kill him. People did throw him in prison. People did whip him and leave him for dead. This is Paul, one of the early church leaders. He experienced a lot. Yet he said, we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. He's not saying that everything is good or that you're always going to feel like it's good. And I've mentioned before, I would never say this to someone who's in the middle of pain or in the middle of trauma or in the middle of something shocking. I'm just saying, though, that in fact, to be honest, this isn't helpful to you when you're in the middle of a storm. This is actually quite painful and insensitive when you're in the middle. But it's a truth that we need to know beforehand, outside of the circumstances. So that there's something that we can remember and hang on to. God, I can't see what good you're going to bring out of this, but I'm going to hang on to you because I've seen your faithfulness in so many other areas, and I believe that you will cause all things to work together for good. Or James 1, verse 2. James, by the way, who was the half-brother of Jesus. If you talk about comparing to siblings, how would you like to be the brother of Jesus? How secure do you have to be? And by the way, I doubt. I'm confident that they did not know that Jesus was Jesus, as we know Jesus, until after the resurrection. There's some records of them still mocking him, saying, go to Jerusalem, go and do your big thing. So they just grew up with a really good brother who didn't seem to do some of the same things that they. Anyway, okay. James knew what it was to have to deal with stuff. Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow, so let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. Now, not perfect in the sense that we know perfect, but basically it's referring to being matured. We will continue maturing and growing. Now, when he says consider it great joy, the best illustration I can think of is someone who is really burdened and passionate to get into a certain career, and they've just been given the opportunity of a lifetime. Fully, the bursary is complete. The housing is covered, food is covered, transport's covered, in the best institution in the world that you would like to study in. But it's going to be tough. It's going to be rigorous. It's the best for a reason. It's not easy. It's not for everybody. There's excitement. You consider it a joy. When people get into medical school, I'm like, are you mad? They're like, guys, they are excited to go and suffer for a while. Why? Because they know what's going to come out of it. And so what James is referring to is us framing suffering, challenges, pain as a way. It's God's school of life. It's how God grows us. Now, I want to be very clear that grace, which I am a big, not just believer in, nothing has affected my life more than grace. God's grace. Nothing. However, I want to make it clear that grace does not excuse responsibility. It empowers it. God's grace empowers us, which is the difference between Carol Dweck's philosophy of growth versus fixed mindsets, of which there's so much good in there, and that of a Christ-centered mindset where we know that it's not just by willpower alone. I can't just will myself enough. I need God's help. I need God's grace. So, a couple of tips on actually developing a growth mindset or a biblical mindset. Number one, and we could pretty much end here, but I still have a few more. Number one is take ownership. Take ownership. Appropriate ownership. Not ownership of someone else's response, no, but ownership of your own life. Let's acknowledge the choice. The choices that we have, the choices that we are making. Believing I'm helpless is a choice. Choosing not to choose. No, I'm not. That's a choice. Choosing to make excuses for not taking steps that I can take. That's a choice. Some of you would know Craig Rochelle, well-known pastor, preacher, author, leadership guru, etc. He says you can make excuses or you can make progress. You can't make both. And I don't think he's just being sharp or edgy. One of the powerful stories that comes back to my mind regularly is the interaction that Jesus had with the man that had been paralyzed for 38 years. He'd been handicapped for 38 years. And Jesus was love, so he wasn't lacking compassion. But when he comes across him, we read in John chapter 5, verse 6, when Jesus saw him lying there and realized he had already been there a long time, he said to him, do you want to get well? Do you want to get well? Now, some of us, those of us that are very empathetic, might be like, sure, Jesus, it's a little bit sulky. But I'll tell you, as someone that has been working in some level of this capacity for nearly 30 years, I have realized that not everybody wants to be well. The problem, the pain, the challenge is so much a part of their identity. Who would I be if I don't lead with what happened to me? Who would I be if I can't lean on? If I can't use this as an excuse? It's not conscious. It's just so deeply ingrained. So I would say that no, I don't think when people really, really get down to it, I don't think that everybody wants to be well. But Jesus would ask you, before anything else, do you want to be well? Do you want to be healed? Which means that we have to then identify what is within our control. And to begin with, it's our choice. It's a level of ownership. Am I going to learn from the struggle, from the challenge, from the pain, from the injustice that I am suffering, or am I going to just concede for the rest of my life? Ronald Niebuhr, who lived from the late 1800s to the early 1970s, wrote a prayer. He was a Christian theologian. He wrote a prayer that became known eventually around the 1940s and 50s as the Serenity Prayer. And it was eventually adopted by Alcoholics Anonymous and other recovery groups. And it is deeply profound. It's a little bit longer than this, but the first few lines are simply, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, but also the courage to change the things I can. And God, please, the wisdom to know the difference. Yeah, I was like, I prayed that prayer. God, help me to see, help me to know. God, what can I do? What can't I do? What do I have to release to you? So identify what is in your control. Identify what is out of your control. Just so you know, other people, ultimately, they're out of your control. Changing other people, ultimately, is out of your control. Timing of the conclusion that you'd like to come to, ultimately, is out of your control. Some of you aren't going to like this part, but even the ultimate outcome, this side of eternity, is ultimately out of your control. But there are things that are within our control, which brings us to point number 2. Sow now, reap later. I am in control of the seed that I sow. I am not in control ultimately of the size of the harvest or the timeline of the harvest. But I am, what I do have control over is the seeds in my hand. What I can do, the choices I do make. I came across an iteration of what I'm about to share with you in a moment from James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits. And it really got me thinking a little bit less comfortably than I would like. But this is my version of this. What might the you from 5 years ago be most surprised at by the you of today? What might the you, so if you were you 5 years ago, what might you be surprised at about the you of today? Positively or negatively? Now, depending on your personality, you've immediately like whiplashed to all the negative, like, oh, I should have been, and could have been, why aren't I? And others, I don't know, maybe you just the eternal optimist, and I'd be pretty amazed at myself. I don't know. But I can tell you that there are some things that I would be surprised that I'm still dealing with. And then there would be some things that I'm encouraged that has made progress. But because of my personality, there are definitely some things that I'd be like, flip, Jason, I would have thought you'd have your act together a little bit further on that issue. Which I think then from a constructive point of view is more helpful to then actually swing it a little bit to look ahead and to ask, what will you in 5 years from today be grateful you started doing today? So you can't change what the you of the last 5 years has done, but you and I can change what we can do over the next 5 years. I've just got to tell you, this is sobering for me in a good way. It just brings perspectives, Jason. Don't be surprised 5 years from now. I can make choices now. The most famous passage along these lines is found in Galatians 6, verse 7 to 9. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. For me to sow a destructive seed and expect a righteous harvest is to mock God. For me to do what is right, faithfully, consistently, and then to assume that God is not going to honor that is to mock God. God won't be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Whoever sows to please their flesh, from the flesh will reap destruction. Whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. Let us not become weary in doing good. Much easier said than done. But let's not become weary in doing good. For at the proper time, we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Sow now, reap later. Number 3, explain, don't excuse. If you've known me for a long time, you might know there's a little bit of a pet peeve. Like, oh, wait, are you trying to explain something right now, or are you trying to excuse something right now? Because there's a very, 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 very big difference. We've all had stuff happen to us. Some more traumatic, more severe. There are circumstances that are more limiting for some and less limiting for others. And so I think it's helpful to understand myself and to understand why I do some of the things I do, but in order to change where necessary, in order to adjust where necessary. So that's where explaining why I keep struggling with something, why that's helpful. But if I'm using what's happened to me as an excuse to keep doing what I'm doing, to keep being hurtful, to keep being destructive, to keep being unreliable, I'm giving into a victim mentality. And I don't have time to unpack this in too much detail, but I want to caution you. I want to warn you, not warn you like from me, warn you for you, that in every circumstance of our lives, we're going to face the choice of coming into agreement with the enemy or coming into agreement with God. The enemy has an agenda for our lives. God has an agenda for our lives. And at the risk of sounding insensitive, and I promise you I don't mean this to be insensitive, I mean this to warn us. If I'm going to give into a victim mentality where I'm saying I've got no hope, no choice, there's nothing I can do, this is just who I am, this is who I will always be, I'm coming into agreement with the enemy. I'm coming into agreement with the narrative that is evil, that is destructive, that is wicked. And the reality is we all have wounds. We do. We've all got stuff that's happened to us. And again, in many cases, some people, it's been far more traumatic and dramatic, and for others it's been more relative. I'm very aware that there's a spectrum, but we've all got stuff that's happened. And I'm just saying that the enemy wants to take our woundedness and turn it into wickedness. God wants to take our woundedness and turn it into a weapon, where it is something that can be used to help others, to fight the enemy, to fight evil, to fight destruction, and to actually bring life. So where I am allowing God to teach me whatever it is I can learn in that season of wounding, in that suffering, but so that I can actually become someone that can heal and provide help and provide hope to others. Okay, here is a quick little table, just to give you some examples, right? Situation, victim response, biblical response. Someone hurts or offends me, the victim response is, I hold the grudge, they owe me. The biblical response is that through Christ I can forgive. So because of how much I've been forgiven, I'm allowing him to remind me of his incredible grace towards me. God, you can help me to forgive in the sense of letting go. I'm going to release the grudge. Not excuse what they've done, it doesn't remove consequences, but God, I'm going to ask you to help me to release the hold that unforgiveness has on me. Another situation would be if I fail at something. The victim response is, that proves I'm incapable. The biblical response is, I don't know how to do this yet, but I can learn and grow. And I do think that there's an extreme to where some positive stuff really does just become hyper. And I don't believe that you can do whatever you put your mind to. I don't believe that. But I do think we can do a lot more than what most of us think. Another situation would be that circumstances are hard. A victim response is, life is against me, nothing will change. Biblical response, God works through everything to shape who he's calling me to be. Situation, if I receive correction, a victim response is, I'm being attacked and unappreciated. In a church context, if a team leader is like having a gentle conversation with you about dropping a ball, they don't appreciate me. No one sees what I do. Guys, that's a victim mentality. A biblical response is seeing correction as an invitation to grow, not a threat to my identity. You will not find anybody that keeps growing, that does not have a hunger, like an openness to learn. Like I don't know it all. I don't have it all together. I want to learn. You may be aware that a lot of top executives and entrepreneurs will have coaches, life coaches. Like from the outside, you'd think they seem to have life pretty sorted out. Generally speaking, these are people that just want to, just that little bit more, just that extra 1%, just that extra, there's a hunger. There's an appetite to keep learning and growing. And again, I wish I had time to go into this a little bit further, but if I think of two biblical characters that would contrast each other, it would be Joseph and Samson. Samson was just, he was not a good man. He did not have character. He blamed and excused his temper on others. He excused going on a murderous rampage because his bride-to-be who gave in to the threats of her fellow villagers, like getting her to get the answer to a riddle that he used to try and manipulate them and prove himself. The fact that she was worried about her whole family being wiped out, and so she, he's like he was a child. Joseph, on the other hand, who was proper victimized. His brother, guys, you think you got sibling issues? His brothers decided to kill him, and then because they had a good meal and felt a bit bad about it, I don't know about that part, but they then decided to be kind and rather sell him off into slavery as a teenager, as a 17-year-old. That is legitimate victimization. Then he's honorable, proves himself to be reliable. Eventually he's promoted to kind of the highest position in the home of his master, and his master's wife, this floozy, like begs him to come to bed with her. Guys, if anybody would have an excuse to say, hey, like she's relentless, there's nobody else around, what must I do? I know that if I reject her advances, I'm probably going to get thrown into prison. Guys, if anyone's got an excuse, if anyone is being victimized, and we have an excuse, it's Joseph. But he's like, how could I do this to God? How could I do this to my master? And he literally has to physically like pull himself away. She like rips his cloak off. Anyway. Yeah. Guys, that is victimization. Falsely accused, thrown into prison. And I don't think this was like one of those nice and neat, polite EU prisons, right? Like this would have been brutal. Now, Scripture doesn't tell us all the daily in-between stuff. But the outcome tells me that Joseph did not have a victim mentality. Joseph had a growth mentality, a biblical mentality. A lot of people can read that story and think that Joseph was turned into prime minister of Egypt in a day and missed that actually it was over 13 years of character formation. It was continuing to make choice after choice after choice after choice for 13 years that God could trust him by elevating him to a position of such incredible influence. Number 4, look for good and look for God. Look for good and for God. We don't have control over what is done to us. We don't. I am not invalidating anything that's happened to you. I'm just saying that we do have a significant measure of control over who we become. And it matters to God. God cares about who I am becoming. Just to be clear, God cares about who I am becoming before he cares about what I'm doing. He does care about what I'm doing, but he cares about who I am becoming ultimately and who I am loving. Look for good. Look for God. Someone reminded me a couple of weeks ago of this quote that first time I read it kind of blew me away, and I had to really ponder on it for a little bit, but just to help with context, this was written in the 1800s by who is possibly the most quoted preacher still today from that period. Charles Spurgeon was known as the Prince of Preachers. Even though he died in his 50s and he experienced just gut-wrenching bouts of depression and physical ailments, he suffered an incredible amount, yet he in many cases saw it actually as a gift, and he said the following: I have learned to kiss the wave that throws me against the rock of ages. I have learned to kiss the wave. In other words, I have learned to appreciate that storm, that wave, that thing that hits me. And rock of ages was an old school term for God, which is taken from Isaiah 26, verse 4 in certain translations, where God, the eternal God, was sometimes translated as the rock of ages. I have learned to kiss the wave that throws me against the rock of ages. Guys, that is That is a growth mindset. That is a biblical mindset. God, I'm determined. If I can only eke out one tiny thing out of this, God, I don't want to miss it. I'm going to appreciate it. Look for good. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the book of Daniel are three young men that refused to bow to the king, and so they are threatened with going into, being thrown into the fiery furnace. And I love how in Daniel 3, verse 16, they reply, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, even if I don't get what I want out of this, even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. That is a mindset that is like, God, I'm going to trust you no matter what. Even if this doesn't work out the way that I would like it to or the way I think it should, I am going to trust you. And going back to Joseph, who experienced the worst of betrayals. Guys, he didn't just have like a little squabble with his brothers where they called him names. They didn't just call him chubby and stupid. Guys, they sold him off into slavery. He was separated from his family from the age of 17 to the age of 30. Yet he shows grace to them, which isn't just because he was weak and whimsical. No, he had seen God and he had seen good in what had happened. And so this powerful verse is recorded in Genesis 50, verse 20. He's talking to his brothers saying, you intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people. What would it take for us to see that level of betrayal, that level of suffering for 13 years in such a way that I can say, listen, I'm not going to deny that you intended to harm me. Please note that the opposite of victim mentality isn't invalidating everything. No. You hated me. You tried to hurt. You did hurt me. But God intended it all for good. And because I believe Joseph did not give into that victim mentality, he was literally able to rescue a nation, in fact, nations, a people group, a family that grew to be millions of people by the time of the Exodus. If he had given into victim mentality, I don't think we'd have the story. So my encouragement is to do what's right and trust God with what's left. Do what's right and trust God with what's left. Joseph didn't know when it would end, when it would change. I think he hoped it would. He didn't know for sure. But he had to keep trusting God on a daily basis, constantly. Lastly, number 5 is to surrender. To have a biblical mindset, a growth mindset in this context, is to actually recognize that our growth trajectory is not just going to develop because I'm determined and I have all the willpower that I would like to have. It is grounded in a relationship with God. It is grounded in a relationship with God. And some of you have had the privilege of going through enough pain long enough, and yes, I'm choosing that word very deliberately, the privilege of going through enough pain long enough to realize that there's a part that we can play in this, and then there's a part that only God can play. And to realize that I need God, to realize, God, I need you. I can do everything right, and I still need you. That is the attitude of Charles Spurgeon, to say, I've learned to kiss the wave that smashes me against the rock of ages, because I am surrendered to my relationship with God. That is more than willpower, but it is with God's help. Last passage is Philippians chapter 2, verse 12, the second half, where it says, work hard to show the results of your salvation, obeying God with deep reverence and fear, for God is working in you, giving you the desire and the power to do what pleases him. I want you to notice that on the one hand, the readers of this passage are being encouraged and challenged to work hard. Work hard in my relationship with God. Work hard to show the results of salvation. In other words, I'm not just saved and get a free ticket. No, it's actually about who I am becoming. So work hard, obeying God with deep reverence. But then it also says, for God is working in you. I've got to work hard. And by the way, God's also doing a work in you. And I think so much of my working hard is my responding to the work that He's doing in me. That is surrender. God, you are giving me the desire and you're giving me the power. Help me. Help me to recognize the desire. Help me to recognize the power and help me to obey you. Guys, we are invited to be wounded healers. God is compassionate to the stuff that has happened to us. But He also, I think, wants to surprise us with just how much He can and wants to bring out of that pain. The Christian response is not to deny the pain. It's not to invalidate it, but it's to surrender it to God. Saying, God, please teach me, show me, reassure me. And by the way, one of the greatest lessons that you will find as you surrender is not that you will have a clearer formula to take control of your life. I think the more that we surrender to God in seasons of pain and wounding and suffering, the greatest thing that we learn is that God is with us. That He's present with us. That He's close to us. That He cares, even when He doesn't remove it. We've looked at that a couple of weeks ago. Even when He doesn't remove that, He cares. He's with us. He wants to bring good out of that situation. He wants to redeem the pain. Guys, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. And I imagine that many of you would know that when a child is struggling or afraid, they don't need all the answers. They need the presence of a trustworthy parent. And God might not give us all the answers we want. I promise you He's not going to remove every source of pain and challenge and struggle. But He does promise to be with us. John 16 verse 33, Jesus' words are recorded where He says, in this life you will have trouble, but take heart, for I have overcome the world.